Today I'd like to continue to share some thoughts from the Bible in regard to a little debate that I had yesterday with a Christian woman who called me a cuck for Jews, and she had asserted that Jews are Christ killers, and she was questioning why I would be defending them or seeking to elevate them to some special status. Now, this Christian woman's remarks are similar to other derogatory remarks made by prominent theologians today, even those that have a hold to a sound gospel. For example, consider the words from Albertus Peters in his book, The Seed of Abraham, where he makes some anti-Semitic remarks towards the Jews. He says, God willed that after the institution of the new covenant, there should no longer be any Jewish people in the world, yet here they are. That is a fact, a very sad fact, brought about by their wicked rebellion against God. And many other quotes can be cited from prominent theologians who are speaking ill of the Jewish people. And I would actually argue that these evil ideas are the equivalent of theological cow manure that's served as a kind of a fertilizer that gave rise to the growth of the weeds of anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany. Now, I might devote future videos to this to explain this in more detail, but I believe it is significant that the vast majority of churches in Nazi Germany held to a form of replacement theology or secessionism. And they denied that the Jewish people were still God's chosen nation, race. Consider that from around 1919 onwards, around 70 to 80% of Protestant pastors had given their support to the anti-Judaic German National People's Party. Adolf Hitler actually spoke well of the replacement theologian Martin Luther in Mein Kampf, calling him a great statesman and reformer. Now, much more can be said about this, but I hope this gives you some idea as to why I believe it's important for Christians to have a proper biblical perspective on the Jewish people and not look down on them more than any other race. Now, getting back to what that woman shared about Jews being Christ killers, it is true that the Jews were guilty of killing Jesus. But so were the Gentiles. For example, consider what Peter and John and others declare about who was guilty of killing Jesus. In Acts chapter 4, verse 27-28, there we read, "For of a truth against thy holy child Jesus, whom thou hast anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people of Israel were gathered together for to do whatsoever thy hand and thy counsel determined before to be done." So we see that in God's eyes, both Jews and Gentiles were Christ killers. And in fact, all the sinners that Jesus died for, including me, share in the guilt of Christ's death. For if it wasn't for sinners like us, Jesus would have never died. And so it's not really appropriate to point the finger at the Jews, looking down upon them as if they are somehow worse sinners than Gentiles, and that only they were guilty of killing Jesus. Note that the Apostle Paul actually seems to anticipate Gentile Christians who might be tempted to look down upon Jews as if they are somehow far worse sinners than Gentiles. Romans chapter 11, verse 18, we read of Paul forbidding Gentile believers from boasting against the branches. He says, "Boast not against the branches. If thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee." Now, the context is dealing with Paul speaking of wild and natural branches. The wild branches represent Gentile believers, and the natural branches represent unbelieving Jews, or those of the Jewish ethnicity, those who were descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the olive tree represents the place of blessing, which is rooted in Jewish covenants. Now, Paul has been speaking of how the natural branches, the Jews, had been broken off or removed from the place of blessing due to their unbelief, or blindness. And Paul is simply forbidding Gentile believers, the wild branches, from boasting against those natural branches, or the unbelieving Jews. The idea is they are not to look down upon them, as if they are somehow inferior to Gentiles, as if Jews are simply worse sinners or more wicked than Gentiles. Jews are sinners, and so are Gentiles. There's none righteous, no, not one, as the Bible declares. All have fallen short of the glory of God. We all need to believe in Jesus Christ that we might have forgiveness of sins. Well, that's all for now. Feel free to comment and share your thoughts. And if you appreciate this teaching, feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you.